Today, we're critiquing a persuasive broadcast monologue arguing against the academic claim that high birth rates, rather than terrorism, are the root cause of regional conflict. Let's dive right into how we can elevate the impact of this piece.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
Addressing the literal demographic argument head-on builds a stronger rhetorical foundation than immediately pivoting to sarcastic dismissal.
I mean, that is just so crucial for a piece like
Right. So the weakness here is that the material currently dismisses the university lecturer's demographic research, the idea that high birth rates correlate with poverty and conflict, specifically citing Gaza, using heavy sarcasm and reductio ad absurdum.
Yeah, like asking for solutions to thin out the children, right?
Exactly. And while that plays incredibly well to an agreeable audience, it leaves the argument highly vulnerable to critics.
Oh, completely. Opponents can easily dismiss the entire monologue by just claiming the author failed to actually refute the data regarding resource scarcity and, demographic pressure.
They just wave it off and say, well, the author completely dodged the economic reality. So my suggestion would be to steelman the opponent's argument.
Steelman, so like the opposite of a straw man argument?
Exactly. You acknowledge the baseline sociological reality that poverty and resource scarcity can create societal friction, but then you pivot sharply to demonstrate how cultural context, specifically leadership and education, dictates whether that friction turns into innovation or violent terrorism.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second. Doesn't giving ground to the academic study, dilute the author's passionate stance?
It feels like it would, right? But conceding a minor premise, like the fact that crowded places have economic issues, actually makes the major conclusion that terrorism is a choice, not a demographic inevitability, completely undeniable.
Right, because you're showing you aren't afraid of the numbers.
Exactly. You prove your objective. So for some concrete examples of how to implement this, the author could insert a line like, while demographic pressures certainly create economic challenges in any densely populated society, claiming that babies are the root cause of systemic terror ignores human agency.
Oh, that's really strong. It validates the economics, but just immediately invalidates the conclusion.
Yeah, or alternatively, the author could contrast Gaza's high birth rate with another historically high birth rate society that didn't resort to terrorism.
Like the post-World War II baby booms?
Exactly. You had heavily devastated, resource-poor environments across Europe and Japan, massive spikes in birth rates, but they focused on reconstruction, not generational conflict.
Wow. Yeah, by offering that contrast, you prove the issue is not the quantity of children, but the choices of the leadership.
Right. It neutralizes the opponent's data perfectly.
So once you've steelmanned the economics, you have to shift to the actual cause, which is education.
Which leads perfectly into our next point. Creating a direct causal link between the academic theory being criticized and the reality of regional education prevents the monologue from feeling like two separate grievances stitched together.
Yeah, the structure here definitely needs some tightening.
The weakness here is that the transition from discussing the Bar-Ilan University lecture to describing how Palestinian children are educated is, it's slightly abrupt.
Very abrupt. I mean, we go from a sterile academic debate to kids learning math by counting casualties.
Right, and history via false narratives. It creates a structural weakness where the piece suddenly jumps from academia is wrong about babies to our enemies educate for death.
And without a strong transitional tether, the listener might just lose the core thread of the argument completely.
Exactly. Audio is relentlessly forward-moving. It feels like two different essays glued together. So the suggestion is to use the concept of educational focus as a structural bridge.
Educational focus. How would that work?
The author can contrast what academia should be studying, which is the weaponization of youth, with what this specific researcher is studying, which is the mere existence of youth.
Oh, I see. That seamlessly connects the academic blindness highlighted in the first half with the reality of the hostile educational system in the second half.
Exactly.
It reminds me of, it's like a doctor blaming a patient's heart attack on the fact that they have a heart rather than the poison they were fed.
That is a phenomenal analogy. I love that. Tying the academic failure directly to the educational reality makes the flow logically airtight.
So what are some concrete examples of how to frame this transition?
Well, one way is to rewrite the transition to say, instead of researchers pathologizing the quantity of children born in the region, they should be urgently investigating the curriculum fed to those children.
That one sentence does so much heavy lifting.
It really does. Another option is to actually use your analogy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you could say blaming the mere existence of children for war is like a doctor blaming a heart for a heart attack while ignoring the poison the patient was given. We shouldn't be counting the babies, we should be reading their textbooks.
Ooh, wow. I mean, that completely solves the structural void, right? It turns a sudden left turn into a perfectly paved highway.
Exactly. And it sets up the stakes for the conclusion beautifully.
Which we definitely need to talk about.
Right. Grounding the emotional climax in universally recognized existential themes rather than localized culture war grievances widens the undeniable impact of the final message.
The concluding section is already so powerful, contrasting the historical weight of the Jewish people and the post-Holocaust reality with modern academic trends.
It's incredibly moving, but the weakness here is that including a polarizing culture war trope, specifically calling out the teaching of 64 genders alongside antinatalism, right at the emotional peak of the piece, acts as a massive distraction.
It really does. It momentarily dilutes the profound gravity of the life versus death post-Holocaust art.
Right. It's like trying to get a jury to focus on a solemn murder trial, but during closing arguments, you suddenly complain about the price of courthouse parking.
That is the perfect way to describe. You drop the frequency from existential weight down to, like, cable news bickering.
Exactly. And potentially alienating listeners who might otherwise entirely agree that children are a blessing and not a strategic threat.
So what's the fix?
The suggestion is to streamline the climax by focusing purely on the dichotomy between a society that celebrates life and one that glorifies death. Keep the incredibly strong framing of Israel fighting for its existence where every child is a victory, but just ruthlessly remove the secondary cultural grievances that distract from the life-death thesis.
Okay, so cut the parking complaints. What are some concrete examples to refine this closing?
The author could remove the phrase teaching children 64 genders and replace it with a sharper contrast. Something like, in a region where our neighbors explicitly educate their youth for martyrdom, an academic institution should not be framing the mere birth of a child as a threat to peace.
See, that keeps the listener's brain entirely in the realm of the region's harsh reality versus the academic's misplaced priority.
Right. Or they could lean heavier into the Talmudic reference already present in the text.
The one about the breath of children holding up the world?
Yes, framing the climax entirely around the ancient promise of survival through youth versus modern academic cynicism.
That ending offers zero distraction, just pure emotional resonance.
Exactly. All right, let's briefly recap the 3 main points of our critique today. First, addressing the opponent's literal demographic argument to build a stronger foundation.
Right, using steel manning to acknowledge the economic reality.
Second, bridging the structural gap by comparing academic focus with actual regional education.
Using education as that transitional anchor.
And finally, sharpening the emotional climax by removing distracting culture war tropes to focus purely on the existential life versus death dichotomy.
Which is going to make this piece vastly more robust and persuasive.
Absolutely. We warmly invite the listener to revise their material using these actionable steps and submit it back to the critique for further review.